On to today's show. So there are a few things I want to discuss. I want to talk about the 2020 census and why that actually is a huge deal. It's a really big deal in terms of representation and democracy in America. I'm gonna break that down. I'm probably gonna spend the most time on that story. But then I also want to talk about very briefly. This is not going to be a. This is not even a story. It's just like a concept that I had in my mind that I really want to share with you guys about the power of harnessing technology for progress in the community and using technology to enforce empowerment in the community and excellence in the community. So I'm going to talk for a few minutes about that. Not anything too long, but just a few minutes. And then lastly, I want to touch on the death of Winnie Mandela, which I was preparing my. That's something I added just today. I was preparing my notes for today's show last night, of course, before she passed away. And then, of course, I heard today that she had passed, and I was like, okay, I can't go a week because now I can't wait till Wednesday to talk about it because I'm not doing it 3 days a week now. So I can't wait a whole week to talk about her death. So I have to talk about it today. So I'm going to talk about that for a few minutes as well. So let's get started. So let me see. On Tuesday, Commerce Secretary Wilbur Ross, announced that the 2020 census will include a question asking whether or not the survey taker is a U.S. citizen. So obviously, this set off a number of alarms, a number of red flags as critics began to fear that this could prompt immigrants here, both illegally and legally, to not participate in the 2020 census out of fear of retaliation from ICE. Of course, ICE has been running rampant. I haven't even covered ICE the way I probably should. I mean, I've come across stories dealing with ICE and regarding ICE that sound like something from, a developing nation somewhere. Like there's so much happening in America up under our noses that we don't traditionally identify with being American. I know that's not. If people who know history know better, but in terms of what's accepted history and what's accepted information, what's accepted to be taught in schools and universities, a lot of the stuff that you hear about going on with ICE isn't stuff that people identify with America. But then too, you have a lot of things going on in American prisons that aren't readily identified with what it is to be American and things that are allowed in American. So you have a lot of people who are worried about ICE and worried about retaliation and being split apart from their families. So this question that's being added to the census, or might be added to the census, we're going to have to see what can be done about this to stop this from happening. But this could have major ramifications. Now, the U.S. Census is one. It is one of the most critical elements of American democracy. And so this is something that people should be worried about as the 2020 census approaches. This is something you don't get a redo on the census. You can't wait for a new president to get in and say, okay, we'll just redo it. No, this only happens once every 10 years, once every decade. So the census is not just about counting how many people are in your country. It has one purpose. And that is the counting of the total population of America. It's not supposed to be about saying, if you're undocumented, then you won't be counted. That's not what it's supposed to be about. It's supposed to be about counting the total population. Undocumented or not. And then it's also not about placing people who are undocumented and who might check that box, placing them under greater scrutiny. And perhaps exposing them to legal activity because of how they felt out the census. That's also not. That's basically, it's an extremist far right interpretation of or I guess I should say it's a far right way of handling population count. Okay, if millions of people are not counted because of fear that they might get deported, okay, this is going to have a massive impact on how local and federal congressional districts are drawn and the allocation of federal funding. Okay, states get money based off of this stuff. So, because an element of this 2020 plan comes off as an attempt by the far right to make sure states like North Carolina, Arizona, and Texas don't turn more blue because of population shifts. Okay, you guys got to understand, and I know a lot of you guys already know this who might be listening to this. You guys are aware, but a lot of people don't understand this. A lot of people are going to say they're not really going to understand the underlying issue, and they're going to be like, okay, well, why are people getting so upset about a question of citizenship being asked? Okay, but when you look at the fact that it's going to have an effect on perhaps millions of people not being counted, you have to understand that this is a strategy. This is a strategy to keep states that Republicans need. Okay, the GOP needs to stay in power, making sure these states don't trend blue. Okay, because that's where we're headed. So listen to this. Like, they want to intentionally, this is my perception, okay? They want to intentionally undercount certain populations of people, okay? Because the GOP depends almost entirely on white conservatives. Okay, white conservatives are their largest, or it's the GOP's largest and most important base. White conservatives are their largest cohort. So if these states that they need turn blue over time, then the GOP is gonna be in a situation where they're not gonna have any hopes of getting a president into office. They can't lose North Carolina, Arizona, Texas, and a bunch of other states because of Latinos and because of black people. They really cannot afford to lose these states. Okay, but their population is decreasing, and over time, over a decade or two, it could have massive ramifications on the ability for Republicans to put a president into office because they just won't have the electoral power anymore. Okay, so in their eyes, the only way they can depend solely on white conservatives and still stay in power is by rigging democracy. Okay, and this is something that I've been touching on off and on for a long time now. Hold on one second. Yeah, so this is something I've been touching on for a long time. This is why I make such a big deal about voter suppression. It's not an issue. You can tell just by how people talk about issues. You can kind of tell the issues they value the most. And a lot of people, you can tell voter suppression is not a top 5 or even a top 10 issue. But understand this, people on the left, progressives and liberals, you're not getting anything you want. Okay, if so many people that you depend on, that Democrats depend on, and leftists in general depend on for votes, if you can't depend on their votes being counted. Okay, so this is the rigging of the 2020 census is an element of that. And this honestly goes beyond voter suppression. I mean, this is bigger than voter suppression in many ways. This is the rigging of democracy quite literally, and quite directly. Okay, so that's what this is all about at the end of the day. The question of citizenship has not been asked since 1950. Okay, so the implementation of this question of citizenship on the census is literally taking us back to the Jim Crow era. Okay, this is one of the most brazen assaults on voter representation that I have ever seen. Okay, outside of like a few like cross-check and stuff like that, this is like DEFCON 5 for representation in government. Now I said voter representation earlier, but outside of just voting, like allocation of resources, how maps are drawn. This is as close to the be all end all as we're gonna get. Okay, this is suppression doped up on steroids, essentially. So $675 billion is divided up and given to the states based on data from the US Census. Okay, it impacts the Electoral College, as I said earlier, because the number of electoral votes states get depends on their population. So the census impacts everything in American life. You know, I can go on and on and on. I'm just giving a few examples, a handful of examples. Now, we know, hold on, I'm getting this message. Hold on 1 second. Okay. So now we know for a fact that black people have been undercounted on the US Census since the beginning of this country. Okay, I've never believed that we're only 13% of the US population. Okay, I think there's a certain percentage of our population that isn't being counted. Okay, and there's data to back this up. Okay, they have data that shows that predominantly black and brown regions of states are the regions where they get the least amount of responses on the census. Okay, so I'm not going to speculate on how many I like in terms of the percentage. I think that's being undercounted. I don't think it's an astronomical percentage. So I'm not saying like 10-20% of our population is not being counted. I don't think it's that huge, and I don't think they'd be able to hide something like that, to be perfectly honest with you. But I could definitely see 1 or 2%, and that might be a little conservative. Okay, so there's one paragraph that I want to read to you guys that's linked in the description box of the YouTube video. Okay, and this is the like if you click on the link and you scroll down to like halfway through the article, you'll see what I'm talking about. It provides a snapshot of census response rates in Winston-Salem, North Carolina. If you don't know where Winston-Salem is, Winston-Salem, North Carolina, and Greensboro, North Carolina. Okay, the darker the area, the darker the blue, the higher the lack of response. All right, so it says in North Carolina, the census tracts in metro areas with low census participation rates, indicated below in blue, like I said a second ago, tend to be largely poor and African American. For example, the population for one tract in Forsyth County in North Winston-Salem is 84% black. Okay, more than 60% of the population live below the poverty line. Okay, the census tract has low response score, a wonky figure calculated by the Bureau's Geography Division of 34%. So a region that is 84% black has a low response score of 34%. All right, now they kind of throw in there that you might have some far-flung, predominantly white rural areas that also have low response rates but that's honestly largely because they don't have the manpower to get people out to those areas. There's no excuse for that in large cities. Okay, so but if you take into account that if you have a situation where large cities are being counted properly and rural white areas aren't being counted, that should give more power to black voters or black people in those regions. But it's not actually happening that way. So let me pull up. Okay, here we go. So the right wing, many of whom are parallel to fascism. Okay, I don't speak in absolutes as often as I possibly can, as long as I catch myself. I don't like speaking in absolutes, so I'm not going to say everybody, but I'm going to say a large number of them, okay, are parallel to fascism and autocracy. Okay, that's why they like Trump. They don't care that Trump likes dictators. They like autocrats. Okay, that they're driven by authority figures, or they're drawn to authority figures. So they want to legalize. Okay, this is very important. They want to legalize the skewed counting of the white population versus the non-white population, so that as white people become a minority in America, they and the Republican Party can maintain their grip on power. Okay, they want to legalize this. So if they do that, if they put this, if they're able to get away with putting this question on the census, okay, that's effectively legalizing, okay, bogus numbers and bogus data. Okay, and using that bogus data to make sure white people have a disproportionate amount of power relative to non-white people. Okay, it's very insidious. Okay, this could have devastating impacts on America long term. However, and if the census is rigged too, or I guess I should say, if the census is rigged, so too is American democracy. You can't have a rigged census and have a democratic structure or democratic apparatus that actually represents everybody. It doesn't work that way. So the average response rate is from an article that I just read from citylab.com. It's in the link in the description box of the YouTube video. So, so where was I? So yeah, so we can't be naive and think all we have to do, because a lot of people are thinking this, all we have to do is get Trump out of office in 2020 and everything will be okay. That's what people keep thinking. Okay, I want to get Trump out as bad as anybody else. Okay, so much so that I want to see him impeached. Now, a lot of people don't agree with that because they say, okay, Pence is worse, and that's true. But I'm looking at the damage that'll do to this administration's credibility, and then on top of that, I don't think Pence is electable. I don't see Pence winning in 2020. Okay, so if it means putting up with Pence, for a few months, assuming we gain enough seats in 2018 to neutralize the power of the executive branch, okay, if it means putting up with Pence for a couple years, and he's going to have no real power to do things because the legislative is going to be a check on his power, I'm willing to put up with that. Like that's how much I don't like Trump. Okay, but even if that were to happen, okay, think about this. The 2020 census shows you how the Trump effect can set America back decades, at least at the very minimum, at least 10 years. Okay, if not more. Okay, and we won't be able to correct this rigging of democracy at least until 2030 when the next census comes around. Okay, think about it like this. Look at Richard Nixon. Okay, look at Richard Nixon. Nixon was a one-term president. All right? Richard Nixon was in power from 1969 to 1974. Okay, he was a one-term president. He did not stay in power for 8 years. Okay, because we all know that he was terrible at his job. Okay, but even though Nixon was a disaster, and even though Nixon was a one-term president who, ran out of office, okay, and committed a complete assault on democracy because he tried to rig an election, we're still dealing with the drug war he created 50 plus years later. So Nixon coined the term the drug war, and he is credited with being the person who kind of created it. Now we know Reagan came into power and he took the bull by the horns and he just ran with it, and he turned it into something else entirely. Okay, but Nixon was the person who originally created the concept of the drug war. Okay, and you have a terrible president who created a terrible policy that is still in place all of these years later. Okay, so you don't know that we don't know that future presidents will overturn all of Trump's disastrous policies. We don't know that. I've heard a lot of people in the media say, if we can get a Democrat into power, there needs to be a de-Trumpification process. And I do believe that, but think about this. We don't know how thorough that de-Trumpification process is going to be. We don't know if they're going to completely get rid of everything that he did. And like I said, the census is one of those things where I don't know the technicalities around. I know for a fact that it doesn't happen every. It's a set time that the U.S. Census actually occurs. You can't have, as far as I'm aware, you can't have a census a year after a census has already occurred. That's not how it works. Okay, so this rigging of democracy, this rigging of the census, is going to stay with us long after Trump is taken out of office. Okay, so Ari Berman wrote a really good article for Mother Jones. He's been on top of this. He wrote a really good article for Mother Jones. He was on Democracy Now! Recently talking about this. And the article that he wrote, I'm not going to read it, but I think everybody should read it if you really want to know more. It's called Hidden Figures: How Donald Trump is Rigging the 2020 Census. And he said, quote, "Of all the ways democracy is threatened under President Donald Trump, an unfair and inaccurate census could have the most dramatic long-term impact." Okay, of 12 states, and this is not the quote, this is just me talking now. Of 12 states that are, let me restart. 12 states basically are planning to sue the Trump administration over the question of citizenship. And 6 former Census Bureau directors, going back to the 1970s, have echoed objections to the adding of a question about citizenship to the U.S. Census. Okay, so according to reports, and I'm just going to end it really quick here. According to reports, this will be the first census. This is something else that people should really be alarmed about. This will be the first census conducted mostly online. Okay, so I was going to read you guys parts of the article, another article from Mother Jones called "The 2020 Census is a Cybersecurity Fiasco Waiting to Happen." Okay, I don't actually think Actually, no, I did put that in the YouTube video. So that link is in the YouTube video as well. They're talking about putting the U.S. Census online. Like, that is so bad. That is a horrible idea. Okay, we were hacked by the daggone Russians. Our voting system isn't flawless. Okay, you want to expose the U.S. Census to potential hacking? You want to talk about fraudulent entries? You want to talk about stuffing the census? Now, let me reread this, because this is something that I haven't seen. If people have been talking about it in the media, I haven't seen it. Okay, this is something that's kind of flown under the radar. Okay, for the first time, the census will be conducted mostly online. What could possibly go wrong? Okay, it's not a long article. It's only a few paragraphs long. Just check that out as well, because that's like like the article says, that's a recipe for disaster. You're just asking for fraud. You might as well be begging for fraud, actually.